if you tell someone I trust you, they step up to it. If you tell them I don't trust you, they'll shy away from it. So you need to tell someone, look, I trust you implicitly. I know you've got it in you. And then in that way, because everyone walks around with disbelief and doubts, like you don't need to add to it. They've already got it for themselves. So why add to it? Just tell them, listen, dude, I know you've got this. And then they're like, someone believes in me. Okay, let me try. And then boom, they get surprised.
Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Edit Undo podcast with myself, Alfie, and my co-host, Stephanie. Today we will be speaking to a very special guest, especially for those of you who are budding screenwriters or aspiring novelists. Our guest has been thrice nominated for the South African Writers Guild Award and won in both 2013 and in 2014. He's also won the Kalasha Award for Best Original Screenplay in 2015. As you might have guessed, he is a prolific writer in South Africa's film and television industry, having executive produced South Africa's first dance film, Hear Me Move. He has also had a creative hand in Remix and Isibaya on Mzansi Magic, as well as SABC2's Muvango and Guilt. And if that wasn't enough, he's also making a name for himself as a novelist with the romantic comedy Love Back and the young adult fantasy, most recently, Man of Stone and Shadow. With no further ado, let us dive
when I was
into our
in Kenya in high
Fidel.
school, I was involved in like amateur filmmaking, and I really loved it. And I thought, well, this is something which I wouldn't mind doing for the rest of my life. And I was thinking to myself, man, why could I study this thing? Because that was always in my mind. Okay, you have to have a tertiary qualification, etc., which is not necessarily true. Actually, I would even just take the word necessarily out. It's just not true that you need to have a tertiary qualification for anything. Having said that, but I was of that mindset. But in Kenya, wasn't any place where one could really study that. So I ended up enrolling for a degree in mathematics, BSc mathematics, which I absolutely hated. And then in the middle of second year, I had it with maths, and I started looking for other alternatives, get out of Dodge. I had to get out of Dodge, and so I started applying to different universities, applying for different bursaries and loans and whatnot, and then eventually I got accepted to Wits University, and I also got a loan to be able to pay for that. So I was quite lucky in that respect. So that's how I ended up at Wits.
Did you have family in SA, or did you just move?
No, I just came. I didn't really have family.
Wow, that's insane.
Sure.
Brave.
Pioneer.
Yeah.
And then?
Then I started studying at Wits. By the way, I should just disclaim I'm a highly opinionated individual. So whenever I tell people I work as a screenwriter, the first question they always ask is, what did you study? And that is always a very wrong question to ask. I've realized asking the right question is more important than giving the right answer. Mm-hmm. But asking what did you study is a wrong question, because what I studied had almost zero implication on what I do. In a way, you could say I work as a writer despite having attempted to study screenwriting at Wits, because when I was studying screenwriting at Wits, I quickly realized that I was not learning anything in that setup. You cannot learn a practical skill in a pedagogical setup. Mm-hmm. You cannot learn. learning how to ride a bicycle through a lecture. Like someone
Yeah.
stands in front of you and says, "Guys, so this is a bicycle. These are the wheels. These are the chains. These are the pedals. What you do is you stand on it and then you." Dude, like what the hell? You can't learn how to ride a bicycle in a lecture. That's how trying to teach screenwriting in a lecture is. Doesn't work that way. And I realized that very quickly. So I quickly enrolled for. I dropped all my screenwriting subjects. So in second year, first year of university, doing a TV and film degree is very generalized, and then in second year is when you specialize. And I knew I wanted to specialize in screenwriting, so I picked up a module in the first semester of screenwriting, and I dropped it by. I didn't carry on with it at all after one semester. And I signed up to the Writers Guild of South Africa's student program, where you'd have like a series of workshops and whatnot. And again, I found the same thing happening there, like pedagogical setup, lectures to learn how to write. But I quickly realized that the difference was that there we were being taught by a working writer. One of the bad habits I have is whenever someone is trying to teach me something, I Google them and I go straight to IMDb. I go on IMDb and I check what's this person's credentials, like what have they done?
Who are you to think you can teach me something?
And I'm sorry to say this, but most of my lecturers at university had nothing on IMDb. They had not done anything. They had no produced nothing. It was all a bunch of theory.
Yeah.
Being imparted by theoreticians. So, but the difference with the Writers Guild workshops was that the people who were busy imparting theory were working writers. They were actual working writers. They had credits to their names. You could find them on IMDb and whatnot. And so what I realized was, these people have access to the TV industry. So I started bugging the lady who was teaching us. Her name's Katty Vinek, very good friend of mine. And at the time, she was head writer on a show called Soul Buddies, which was a children's show on SABC One. This was maybe 2006, way back 2006. So I started bugging her and telling her, please, you got to get me on the show. Get me a job on the show. Let me be an intern on the show. Let me do whatever on the show. And then she was like, okay, after I really bugged her for a long time, maybe like 3 months, she just said, all right, cool. You could write like a test script for the show, and then we see how it goes. So they gave me the opportunity to write a script, an episode of the show for which I was not going to be paid. But they liked it. Then they were like, okay, now you can write a real episode for the show and pay.
Sure.
And then,
That's incredible.
After that, I wrote 2 more episodes, and then she moved on to another show, and then she asked me to write other episodes on that other show. And then so it just spiraled from there. Like you meet more people, they move on to other shows, they call you up, give you work, etc., etc. So that's how I ended up working as a screenwriter. Yeah.
Is the community of screenwriters in South Africa quite small, or is it growing?
It's tiny.
Yeah.
It's quite small. It's quite small. And I mean, everyone knows everyone else. And so you can't afford to like piss anyone off big time. And you can't afford to be like unprofessional because guys will know like, yeah, it's like 0 degree of separation. It's not even 1 degree of separation. It's 0 degrees of separation. Like, everyone. And you've got everyone on your phone book. Yeah, so, yeah.
I mean, that makes sense. You're the only and first screenwriter I know.
It's a very small community. It's not tight-knit. I'd be lying if I said it's tight-knit, but it's small.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Fidel, you mentioned that in varsity, everything was so theoretical, and that's not really the best way to learn something that's practical in life, in your workforce. And I heard from Alfie and what I read and saw as well that you're quite passionate about helping or contributing back to the community or the film industry in SA, and also helping youngsters, up and coming talent. So what are you doing differently, seeing as you now know, the varsity is offering a very academic, theoretical approach? What are you doing differently to help them?
So what I have done differently, which I am not yet doing again because I'm a little bit scared to go into it. But so in 2008, I started a film production company. And that's where I think the highlight of that company was we made South Africa's first dance film. Africa's first dance
Sure.
film, and during that time, when I was running that company for 10 years, I started an incubation program for screenwriters. So what we would do is literally put a call out for writers to all the film schools, etc., get them in, and there was very little theory, very little theory. Like what they would do is we tell them, okay, guys, so this is what we're working on in real life. These are our clients. We're making a show for SABC. We're making a show for Mzansi Magic, etc., etc. You guys need to like ghostwrite what we're doing. You need to write episodes. Like it's the real thing. And there's even a few times I did this on two shows where like they wrote the episode. So I'd go to the client, to the broadcast, and tell them, listen, we've got these young writers
Yeah.
in. We want them to write episodes of this show we're doing for you guys. Broadcaster would say, no, we don't know them. They don't have a track record. I was like, okay, sure, don't worry. I went back to the company, told the interns there, okay, guys, you write the episodes. I'll sign it off as mine.
Wow.
Under my name. They did that, presented it to the broadcaster. Broadcaster accepted the scripts, and I turned around and said, do you know who really wrote this? Do you know who wrote this?
Wow.
It was that kid who you didn't believe. So we're changing the credits. And that's how and all of them now are working in the industry.
wow.
You know?
That's
All of them,
amazing.
right? And
Wow.
yeah, so people just need a chance. They just need an opportunity. They need people who can be like. And the thing is, like, if you tell someone I trust you, they step up to it. If you tell them I don't trust you, they'll shy away from it. So you need to tell someone, look, I trust you implicitly. I know you've got it in you. And then in that way, because everyone walks around with disbelief and doubt, like you don't need to add to it. They've already got it for themselves.
Absolutely.
So why add to it? Like, just tell them, listen, dude, I know you've got this. And then they're like, someone believes in me. Okay, let me try. And then boom, they get surprised. So I left Cold Stove about 5 years ago, 2017. So 4 years ago, I left Cold Stove. And I have been strongly reconsidering, because now I work completely freelance on my own and don't have an office or that infrastructure. But I have been thinking a lot about restarting a kind of apprentice program and making it even closer to the apprentice programs of medieval Europe, where someone would come and literally pay you. So what would I tell people? I tell people you've got two options. You can pay thousands of rands to a film school where you learn a bunch of theory, or you can work with me, pay me, and you'll be working on real stuff.
Yeah. Wow.
Real stuff
Yeah.
that's going to SABC, that's going to Netflix, that's going to whoever. It's not theoretical. It's the real deal. So you choose where you want to spend your money.
Yeah.
But that's how apprenticeships worked. Someone would go to an apprentice and they'd get indentured. I think that was the term. And they'd pay an amount. It's like school fees.
Yeah.
So that's what's in my mind. That's what I'm playing with at the moment. And I'm just thinking to myself, though, man, managing humans is a lot of work.
No, it
It
definitely
takes
is.
a lot of effort to manage humans.
But I think what you're mentioning, I think, is very important. I think I've also personally spent quite a little bit of time thinking about that sort of apprenticeship framework from medieval Europe. The whole idea of having an apprentice working under a master. The master is a part of a guild, and to become a master, you kind of need to create a masterpiece. And when you look at the way universities and current education is structured, it's actually modeled. It was at least originally modeled around that. That's essentially
Yeah,
why you'd have your doctor's degree. Essentially, is when you would become a master in your specific trade, and to do that, you have to write a
absolutely.
paper, which is essentially your masterpiece in your specific skill set. And
Yeah,
when you're an
yeah.
undergraduate, you're technically an apprentice. But the one thing that's different is, as an undergraduate, as an apprentice, you're not actually under an individual.
Yeah.
And I think that is the big difference, because I mean, even for me, getting into my specific industry, for me, the sort of the match, or the spark that really got me going was when I actually got to see what real designers did on a day-to-day basis. Like, I spent a
Absolutely.
month of work experience seeing what designers do, and from there I'd realized, like, I didn't need to finish my degree to be able to do that, because I was already able to do the things that they were doing. And like, with just a little bit of time and a little bit of practice, I could make this my career. And I mean,
Yeah.
here I am 5 years later. But I think the important thing around that is when you actually get to see what somebody does on a daily basis, it kind of changes the specific field from some ephemeral, theoretical, like hypothetical thing to like tangible day-to-day interactions that
Mm,
constitute the job.
Yeah.
And so I think it's
mm,
super important, the approach that you're speaking about. And I guess especially in a country like South Africa, where there is still so much work to be done from the perspective of education, you know.
absolutely, 100%. And in many ways, um, because I'm surrounded by so many academics, I need to be careful what I say. But I do feel that a lot of degrees in university, I mean, that model as it is now is it has it's made itself irrelevant out of greed. So universities, I feel they pile on and create new and more products for the market. Degree in this, degree in that, degree in this, degree in that, without really paying close attention to like how practical it is in reality. And as a result, you've got more and more people who've got degrees and end up unemployed
Yeah.
because it doesn't what they're doing doesn't speak to the real world. And the second thing that happens is that you have many more people. The amount of time you spend in education is extended because you spend time and money at getting a degree, which is irrelevant. Come out of that, then you spend time and at least you're being paid, but you spend time now getting, the practical education in a graduate program or some kind of, when you start working you first 2 3 years of work is just like, okay, we're gonna teach you, like what you do in this field, whether
Yeah.
it's banking, whatever, auditing. We're gonna actually now we'll teach you because what you learned before, that was just I don't know what. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was to teach you the virtue of discipline and the virtue of study and hard work, but in terms of the nuts and bolts
Yes.
of this thing, you're gonna learn again. So people end up really only working towards their late 20s, like adding value. So it just takes a long time. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe this I guess pivot is kind of slightly selfish on my side because I'm interested to hear a little bit about your process as a writer, because I think many people kind of like, we engage with books on a day-to-day basis and different kinds of stories, so we always get to see the end product, but I don't think enough people know writers to the degree that they actually know what the process looks like for a person who kind of takes this creative endeavor. So can we maybe start? Can you tell us a little bit about like some of or maybe just like an overview of how you approach writing, and maybe specifically we can start with script writing, and what you would say that looks like for you, and if there's anything. So you can maybe imagine that I'm a person who is a budding writer who is interested in actually stepping into this field. Can you maybe give us a little bit of a view of what that process looks like?
Yeah. The so first of all, I have to give a disclaimer, which is I'm always refining my process. So it's always changing ever so slightly with every project I do. I'm not one of the things I try to do very seriously now is to reflect on my previous process and crystallize a little better what worked, delete what didn't work, and all. So my process is always changing, but there are certain constants, which time I've always realized these things always work no matter what. And very early on, so one of my mantras as a writer is start with the antagonist. Start with the antagonist. And I've just started to realize more and more that. So one of my biggest fears as a writer is running out of juice, like not being interested in writing anymore. Like I don't want to do this anymore. I just become like a burnt out artist type, Like all I want to do is drugs now. That's it. No reason for living. Don't produce anymore. Like that's a real fear. It's a real fear. And I've seen it happening with, I don't know, I mean, I don't know the details, but I always ask myself, why is it that the big names, like in the world of screenwriting, who were huge in the 80s disappear in the 90s, and the ones who were huge in the 90s disappear in the noughties, and the ones who were huge in the noughties disappear, like every decade they're just getting replaced. And it's very rare to find those ones who've got staying power as screenwriters. Very, very rare. And why have I taken that? It sounds like I've gone a bit away from the thing. So coming back to the thing, to what I'm starting to guess is one has to always have a fascination with characters, because stories are about characters. And once you always have a fascination about characters, and I'm always deeply interested in human beings in general, real human beings in general, and then fictional human beings in a story, that gives you a lot of juice. And more specifically, of the fictional human beings in a story, the most interesting ones, I'm starting to realize that the villains, the antagonists, the bad guys, those make this always, like across the board. This has been, it used to be like a theory, like start with the antagonist, but now for me, it's a principle. Start with the antagonist. Like I always start with the antagonist. And I spend a lot of time thinking about what's their motivation? How does this motivation speak to the theme of the story? So those are like three things that seem to contradict each other, but I always say start with the antagonist, start with the theme, start with the climax. Like how do you start with three things at the same time? I don't know, but just do it. But start with the climax, and basically starting with the climax means begin with the end in mind, you know, because the climax is the end. But I usually spend a lot of time asking myself, who's the villain, bad guy, or antagonist? What do they want, and why do they want it? Because it can't just be like Pinky and the Brain, we will take over the world. I mean, why? Why do you want to take over the world, Pinky and the Brain? You know, why? So the motive has to really speak very strongly to the theme for me. Why do I say for me? Because writers like Stephen King say theme comes last. Theme is something that you discover right at the end of your writing process. That for me is a yes and a no, because I typically find that if I start by asking myself, what is this story about? Like at a thematic idea level at the beginning, it gives me a springboard from which I can dive into the pool of story writing. And at the bottom, I'll discover an even clearer theme. But so there are two themes: the theme I started out with and the theme I ended up with. But I needed that theme I started out with to give me a springboard into the rest of the writing process, such as discovering an antagonist. So, for instance, from the theme, I move to the antagonist because I think of the theme as merely as a casting principle. So, finding an antagonist for me is like a process of casting actors. You call them into the thing, they do an audition. So, for me, finding an antagonist for a story is a lot like that. But you need to know what are you looking for in the antagonist. So, for instance, if the theme I'm exploring is a theme of, let's say, individual versus society, the individual versus the society, and I like to express themes in terms of this versus that, the individual versus, well, let me give you a most recent example of a script I've just finished. If I'm exploring the theme of duty versus or loyalty versus disloyalty, right? So I'll take that as a keyword and I will permutate synonyms around that. So what does loyalty mean? Loyalty means sense of responsibility, sense of duty. Maybe there's a vow, maybe there's an oath, there's a promise, there's a sense of sticking to the rules, doing what I said I ought to do. There's a sense of military discipline. All these are synonyms which will come up when you dig further and further into the word loyalty. So already I'm starting to think, from loyalty I've arrived at military and discipline. Okay, we might be looking for a villain who's in the military. Okay, cool. And he might probably be someone who's all about the rules. And maybe he takes the rules a bit too far. That's what we're looking for. So now I start casting for a villain who I know is going to have a military background, who is all about the rules, all about like following orders, and maybe he takes it too far. And then from that, I'll realize the hero is probably someone who is going to challenge that aspect, who's going to challenge and that false understanding of what loyalty means and what rules are there for. Spirit of the law versus letter of the law, and these two are going to clash. So from that, I'm like, okay, so we're going to look for a hero who is someone who will be more about the spirit of the law. And we're going to tell a story about how one character who embodies the letter of the law clashes with the character who embodies the spirit of the law. And that's the story. So that's how I'm now I start looking for characters. So I'm probably thinking if the antagonist is a military guy who's all about rules, the protagonist will probably also be a military guy. who maybe bends the rules too much, you know,
You make it
and is
sound so easy.
I'm like, it's crazy. Like as I'm listening to you, I'm like, does this guy have this thing written down
Yeah.
somewhere? Like,
I was
has he practiced this? What's going on here?
I really feel like we're listening to a story. Like I want to know what's gonna happen to this oak.
That is
That's
yeah,
amazing.
but
fascinating.
that's the process. So
Mm-hmm.
starting with the theme, and then with the antagonist, I already have a climax. I know the climax is going to be the clash of the rules guy versus the bending rules guy. That's going to be the climax. Maybe one will kill the other, one will defeat the other. But by that little process, which I've summarized it in a few minutes, but it takes weeks. It takes weeks because now I work with permutations. Like I'm thinking, is it a general? Is it a lieutenant? Is it a colonel? Okay. Is it in the navy? Is it in the air force? Is it in the army? Like permutations, permutations, permutations. Like until yeah, yeah. So it's just playing with possibilities of these different characters. And I think that is really, really important because that's so this is my theory at the moment, which could be wrong, but I think this is what keeps the juice going in terms of creativity. Just that interest in human nature
Yeah.
and human beings, especially villains. Villains are so interesting. They are so incredibly interesting. Wow. I mean, yeah.
And
Sure.
I mean, on that point specifically, it's crazy because for me, at least personally, some of the best movies are the movies where the villain is a stronger character. I mean,
Yeah.
if you look at The Dark Knight,
Absolutely.
Oh
like
yeah.
the
Yeah.
Joker is
Yeah.
an
Yeah.
amazing
Yeah.
character. Like
Yeah.
he, pretty much everyone else could have just been sitting watching him, and it would have still been a blast.
Yeah.
And I guess sometimes I suspect that it's sometimes because through a villain you get to live a side of yourself that you don't actually get to embody. You know, because
Yeah. Yeah.
everyone has got the hero and the villain inside of them, and it's a constant battle
Mm.
in our daily
Yeah.
lives. And by actually being able to really look at a villain come to life in a well written story that's relatable, especially a relatable villain,
Yeah.
Mm.
it essentially allows you to explore a part of yourself. I'm maybe not necessarily in the writing space, but I'm definitely a student of story. And
Mm.
I think that like there's something very interesting about a relatable villain because it essentially gives you the chance to live a side of yourself that you don't get to experience in real life, which I think is what makes a good villain such an engaging experience.
Mm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And also it's what lifts a film from being a piece of cheap propaganda. Propaganda is always films are always about something. They're always about something. Propaganda happens when you only present one side of an argument and say this is it. No other sides of the argument exist. You know, that's propaganda and indoctrination.
Yeah.
But every argument has sides, and the sides are usually are pretty well matched.
Yeah.
And a great film is a film that explores a theme and looks at it from all sides. And if it fails to examine one side and acts like it doesn't exist, that's when it just becomes cheap propaganda, and doesn't really serve any purpose. No one walks out of there thinking about anything
Yeah.
or feeling
Yeah.
moved or feeling that this thing spoke to me.
You're
It
definitely
actually
right.
insults the intelligence when people make a film that's pretty one-sided or tell a story that's one-sided.
So you mentioned now your process of writing, and recently you got into more writing of novels. Is the process different? Writing scripts, writing novels?
Um, well, yes and no. It's in terms of the initial stages, because I'm a hardcore plotter. And I learned, okay, so you've got plotters and pantsers. Pantsers are writers who write by the seat of their pants. Stephen King is a pantser. You just sit down and then you just start writing, and the story just flows. And it's all coherent and nice by the time you get to the end. I've tried that and I've failed at that. So, but I'm a hardcore plotter, and J.K. Rowling is a plotter. So the world, the space exists for both kind of writers and everything in between. So in terms of as a plotter, this process of plotting a novel and the process of plotting a screenplay or a TV episode are very, very similar. But the process at the end of how you write it is where it kind of differs. Because with a novel, you spend a lot more time on atmospheric writing of observing. You observe the environment. You spend a lot more time writing about, the weather, the trees, you have to you describe what the five
Detail.
senses.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You go into that. Well, that's a style of writing I prefer, as opposed to more like the other writers were very cerebral, which I don't like. Especially first-person stories tend to be very cerebrally written, and I don't like first-person stories personally. I tend to avoid them. And anyway, having said that, so towards the end of the process, you're writing a hang of a lot more words in a novel because you're also describing people's thoughts, which you never do in a screenplay. But the initial stages of the process are very similar when you're outlining the thing. Very, very similar. Just towards the end, that's but the two do speak to each other. Like one thing I realized after writing the novel, every script I wrote, because now what writing the novel did was it helped me to overcome my fear of description writing. Because I
Okay.
was always like, oh man, this is so hard.
Yeah.
Because screenwriting, when a screenplay is not a finished product. So you're still going to have the location scout and the director and the cinematographer and the art director and the production designer. All these people will come to describe what is written in a very bare bones format in a screenplay. In a screenplay, you'll just say exterior forest, night. And then the guys will be like, let's find the forest. What kind of trees are there? What kind of crickets are chirping? They'll be looking for all of that stuff. In a novel, you do all that yourself. In a novel, you're the director, the
Yeah.
cinematographer, the location scout, the production designer, art director. You're everything, which is a heck of a lot more descriptive than you're doing. So because I did that work writing a novel, and I hope to get a chance to write more novels, I sort of built my muscles from that heavy lifting. So when I went back to screenwriting, everyone in the screenplays I wrote after I finished this last novel, Man of Stone and Shadow, everyone was like, dude, the descriptions, I could see it. I was there.
That's amazing.
And and I wasn't even like writing a
Yeah.
lot of the script. It makes you like realize, in this scene, I need to describe the sound of the footsteps on the grass. They pad along on the grass softly like leopards. And you just put that, and people are like, "Oh yeah, I can see it. I can see it." That's all. That's all. So yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that is.
And even just the way you speak about it, it even like sort of brings it to life.
Yeah.
And so I guess a question that I had on my side. So as you know, myself and Steph are in the design space. And one of the really important aspects of the work that we do is user research. And I guess it's maybe not so obvious that there is also a fair amount of research to be done when writing. So can you just talk a little bit about either the importance or non-importance of research in your opinion in the writing process, and a little bit about what that actually looks like?
So research in writing is important, but it can also become so one needs to understand where it is in the list of priorities. It's important, but it's not the most important thing. Why? Because writing is all about verisimilitude. In the same way in which you're not writing a biography or an autobiography. You're not describing a real person. You're describing a story person, a fictional person. A fictional person merely seems like a real person. And the way they seem like a real person is because you just identify certain aspects that real people have, but you leave out a heck of a lot of things that real people also have. So there's that very similitude between fictional people and real people. And research mirrors that process, because with research, a writer needs to be able to discern, to pick out the small elements that will add verisimilitude to the story and leave out the rest. Because research is a lot like a river that can flood its banks. You need to know these are the banks, this is how I've set them up, and that's it. Anything that is not part of this riverbank, I'm going to ignore. And you need to, so what does that look like in practice? Keeping in mind that the purpose of research is verisimilitude, not to recreate reality, but to create a representation of reality. What does that look like? For me, what that looks like is after outlining the scenes, one sentence outlines of every, one sentence description of every scene. What I do is I break that scene down, and this I learned from filmmaking. I break that scene down, that one liner. I identify what are called world building categories. So I identify settings, buildings, geographical locations, costumes, any weapons, any technology, any clothing, costumes, traditions, rituals, anything that could be referenced in that one scene. So let's say, for instance, I say they go to the market to buy an old book. They go to a used bookstore in the middle of the city and buy an old book. Okay, cool. That's it. So I need to be so from that I can know that there's a city, there's a used bookstore, there's a book. There's probably the book, the guy who owns the bookstore. There are probably the other books in the bookstore. So I need to be able to very quickly research what's the city, what street would that bookstore be on, how old is the bookstore, etc. So I let those questions inform the research. So the outlining comes before the research, and from each little sentence of the outline, I then like bullet point or list the things that I would need to research. So my research is very, very pointed. What's a great name for books, for a bookshop? Okay, what are nice names for bookshop? Bookshops. The Old Quill or something. I don't know.
Flourishing Blocks.
Something like that. I don't. But so the process is the outline informs the research, not the research informing the outline.
Yeah.
Because I think the research informing the outline is a process that's followed for documentaries and biographies. But in terms of fiction, the outline has to inform the research.
Yeah. Very interesting. It's kind of the same process Alfie and I also follow when we do have a research project for the design space. We have certain objectives, outlines to define the space of research and questioning and thinking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Then another question which I had, there's an industry which I guess I've got a budding appreciation for, and I think you might as well. So in the UX space, one of the things that's kind of interesting is that you get UX designers for banks and corporates and companies and that kind of stuff, and then you get UX designers for games. And one of the things, I was reading an article the other day by Julie Zoe, or it might have been a LinkedIn post, and she was mentioning the fact that in the game industry, UX designers get paid so much less than they do in corporates, but they actually produce some of the best designers. And so, can you maybe speak a little bit about some of the parallels that you found between your industry and the gaming industry?
I mean, it's almost exactly the same. Because the only difference I'm starting to realize, and I spend a lot of time now on gaming forums. I don't play games, but I read what game writers write about and how they think. And I've realized their processes are so beautiful. You see, the great thing about game writers is they are actually a close-knit community. And you remember at the beginning I said screenwriting in South Africa is a small community but not close-knit. Game writing is a small community and it is close-knit. And guys are always talking to each other and helping each other. And that's fantastic. Because what I've realized is that the only difference between a game and a film is that in a tabletop role-playing game, what you call the player characters, or what we call the guys sitting around the table, the players.
Yeah.
In a tabletop role-playing game, the players are what in the film world are called the audience. That's it. Oh. Like as soon as that happens, like you just realize that So when you say, oh yeah, okay, so the guys around the table are getting excited or whatever, they're feeling scared, they're getting angry, that's basically you're speaking about the audience. And then the player characters in the tabletop role playing game are the characters in a film or a TV show or a novel. So the parallels, after that, everything to me is just exactly the same. So for instance, when I was speaking about research and I mentioned world building categories, I mean, I got those world building categories from players, like the guys. Like I used to be so daunted by world building because it's so much work. Or it seems like so much work. And until I realized, I read a book called Play Anything by a guy named Ian Bogost, and he said that basically his theory or his paradigm was that you need to be able, with whichever work is on your desk, to go so deeply into it and explore every element in it that it starts to feel like a game. Like when you're a kid, you would get so engrossed in what you're doing that the hours would pass because you try to take things apart and find out how do they work,
Yeah.
etc. Like what are the intrinsic elements to this thing, and then you get lost in that, in the wonder and the awe of how things are put together by pulling them apart. And he was saying you can do that with anything. And then I thought to myself, there must be a way to do this with the world building.
Yeah.
And then I discovered how the world building processes of game writers. And I realized these guys, they go so deep. Like they go into artifacts, ritual, tradition, customs, organizations, languages, costume, food, and they're just having fun. And
It's
they
so
play.
immersive.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's so immersive.
Yeah.
For them, it's not work anymore. In fact, I've found so many game writers who are like, dude, I'm scared of world building because it's so addictive. Like, I end up not playing the game because I'm just lost in the
Sure, that's insane.
and I mean, but in terms of and the thing I really love about game writers is they're all about process. They're all about process. They don't take themselves too seriously. The problem with writers of novels and screenplays is we live in this like imaginary, illusionary bubble where it's all about like there's a lot of prestige associated with it, which is false prestige. Like, oh, dude, you're a writer. Oh my god, you know. But game writers are free of that burden, and the reason I call it a burden is because it hampers your thinking. It makes you very, very precious. Like, oh, no, this is a special thing. No, man, it's not. Like, and so game writers, because they're not hampered by that, they freely think about process. They play with process. They share process. They discuss process. And then as a result, their processes become so much more robust and beautiful and effective. And I've learned like this process I described to you
Yeah.
of starting with the theme and then going to the antagonist and then going to the protagonist,
Yeah.
etc. That was from a game writer.
Sure. Okay.
That was from a game writer. I had only seen bits and pieces of it over the years, and I'd never the person who like explained it in a one-page document the way I explained it to you was a game writer. And I was like, dude, you don't understand what you've just done here. Thank you.
Yeah, we kind of
Yeah.
sometimes as creatives, we're so outcome driven and outcome focused, so we forget about the process and how the process is the biggest part of the outcome and just our
Yeah.
discipline. We need to
And the
spend
process,
more time being uncomfortable in the process.
absolutely. And in fact, next to my desk, my writing desk, I've got a big sign on the wall that says, "This project will pass and be forgotten, but the process remains."
Nice.
That's very cool.
Sure. That's nice.
And it's good to remind yourself of that because it's easy to get married to the actual product.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, like it seems like you're doing the right thing for the project, but in the long term, it ends up not being the case.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, Fidel. Alfie listed, all your prestigious achievements and awards and how renowned you are in this industry. And now that you've established yourself quite a bit in South Africa, is this a space in a country you feel you would want to stay in? Or would you, if you get the chance, go to the bigger blockbuster countries like the States or the UK or some of the more bigger established industries?
That I'd say yes and no. And first of all, I'd say yes for the experience of working on a project of that scale. Like, it's for me, I would really like to be able to work on a project of that scale. Having said that, I am aware of the cons of projects of that scale. That you have, if someone is paying you, $2 million to write a screenplay, as they get paid when you're writing, Avengers and those things. Those guys get paid in the millions, for a screenplay. I mean, if a film is $1 billion budget,
Yeah.
there's no way you're paying a screenwriter less than $1 million. There's no way. So if you're paying those guys, they come under a tremendous amount of pressure. They come under so much pressure, with people, breathing down their necks, second guessing every decision, right, rewriting everything they write, never giving them the time and space to explore and to play and to discover, which is what writing is all about. They're always telling them, listen, this film is supposed to be in cinemas by next year, June.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
we don't care. We want the script in 3 months. And you're like, no, but I really need to discover this character's motivation. I mean, I really want to know why Thanos wants to destroy the world. We want to go deep into it. Listen, I don't care. It has to be in cinemas by next year, June. So, no, I want to play. I want to discover the characters. Listen, we're paying you $2 million. Do you want it or not? Because there's another guy. so you take the money, of course. You take the money. And a lot of the reason why there's many of these blockbuster films, at least for me, I feel like, my goodness, like, why do they make such crap? Why do they make stuff like this? And then the independent films film so much better, storytelling wise. It's not that the writers are terrible. It's the studio system. A gazillion bean counters breathing down your neck, second guessing your decisions, rewriting everything you put together, putting you under so much pressure that you can't explore, play, and discover as a writer. And so yes and no. That's the con. So I'd like to experience that scope of writing. I am aware of the cons from having listened to other writers and podcasts and interviews, etc. Having said that, a friend of mine who studied in the American Film Institute and worked in Hollywood for a number of years before coming back to South Africa, where now he's a well-established director, told me something very interesting. And he only does international projects. He doesn't do South African projects. He only does international projects with Netflix. He said that if you stay, so I told him, listen, I'm thinking, what do you think about Hollywood, et cetera, et cetera? Is it something to aspire to? And then he said, the funny thing is that if you stay here, you, in South Africa and Africa in general, you hold on to your unique selling point. And the unique selling point is authenticity of a voice as an African storyteller. And even in the States, even if you're in the States and let's say you're Black, you're African American in the States, you still won't have a level of authenticity of being, in the African continent and coming from Africa. And this is something which took me a very long time to understand, because you never know like what you've got because you've always had it in you, So you don't realize that this comes naturally to me. It's like if you tell a fish, oh, dear fish, you swim so awesomely. They'll be like, no, but I've only done this all my life. I'm a fish. Ah! And then like, no, the way you swim is so elegant. We human beings swim like in such a clumsy way, but you as a fish, the fish will be like, well, I was just born doing this. So when I think this last screenplay that I wrote for this guy, like so many people are like, oh man, it's so authentic. It's so this, it's so rooted in Africa, etc., etc. And then I realized that as I was doing my research, there was a lot of like decades of research that had been done growing up that was just in the back of my mind that are just like, without even being aware of it, of, how people interact in a certain space when they're with people who are older than themselves, or men and women, or, it's just there in the back of my mind. And it's just been there for decades, and that's a kind of authenticity which gives you a unique selling point, because it means your products will have a certain quality to them, which cannot be easily replicated because of who you are and what you bring to the table. So that's the advantage of staying in Africa, which especially now as more and more studios they'll only increase their footprint in Africa. Netflix already is a pretty big one, but Amazon is coming, HBO is coming, Disney Plus is coming. And they'll be looking for, because after a while, if you look at the shows which are becoming like really popular in the world now, it's shows that are not necessarily just your run of the mill American
Yeah.
stuff. You've got your Korean shows, you've got your Argentinian shows, etc. So there is a growing palette for stuff that's not American and is distinctly and authentically Korean or Nigerian
Yeah.
or Argentinian or whatever. So and for that you need people who are from there and rooted in that.
Absolutely, yeah. I've realized
That-
since Netflix has become a little bit more of a democracy in terms of serving different films from different countries and backgrounds, I really enjoy Spanish TV. There's just so much drama and so much conflict, and it just speaks to their culture, their lived experience, and it's not
Yeah.
something we typically just watch American TV. So if you aren't deliberate about your exposure, where I feel at least Netflix has removed the veil at least a little bit, which is a good start, and it's exciting to know more of that might be happening.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so true, because I was just thinking the other day, actually, like, if you look at some of the hardest hitting TV shows that have come out recently, not like since Game of Thrones, like America's been being left behind.
Yeah.
Like, there's currently, there's Squid Game, there's been Money Heist, and there was another one that came out also pretty recently. But like, it's really great to see that international films are actually getting or films from other countries are getting an international audience.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I now
It's-
know. I now know
Go ahead.
how the Scandinavian countries just love crime. Like, they produce so many crime shows, and it's brilliant.
And they're so good. And they're so good.
Yeah, like Borgen, it was so good.
Ooh, I haven't heard of that.
Oh, you have to watch it, Alfie.
Yeah. There was something that I wanted to ask specifically. Oh, okay. So I guess another thing that I wanted to ask, like, how do you think? Because one of the things that I've always been fascinated about, specifically in novels and longer stories, is as you'd mentioned earlier, the way you sort of need to describe things. Like, I've always found that super fascinating, because when I have to describe something, I pretty much describe it in the most mundane way possible. And so, can you maybe talk to us a little bit about how, or whether you feel your perspective has changed with how you actually look at the world? Like, so like how has writing essentially changed you on a day-to-day basis?
I think it's made me also on two fronts. On two fronts. Number one, it's made me. This is going to sound really silly. It's made me learn to slow down and pay attention to birds and trees. I know it's dumb, but birds and trees. But I mean, birds and trees are actually so beautiful, and I think only writing has made me like be able to like slow down and ask myself, hang on, look at that bird's tail. It's actually got a fleck of yellow on the underside. Like I'd never noticed that. And I've been seeing this bird all my life,
Yeah.
So writing like forced me to slow down. And then secondly, it's also forced me to pay closer attention to what people are saying. Like listen more carefully to what people are saying and to pick up the what's unsaid, like what's between the lines, like what's the subtext of what they're saying, yeah, what's the underlying meaning. So I think those two things, it sort of has heightened my observation in terms of people, in terms of listening, and also just being more interested in human beings, because human beings are fascinating. I mean, here I am speaking to someone who's been to like a gazillion countries in Europe and whatnot, and there's going to be a character one day who will just quit a very nice corporate job and just go backpacking across Europe in one of my novels, like just show up and maybe it will be a woman, it'll be a guy named Steven, so
I'll look out
But
for
humans
it.
are so fascinating.
I look forward to
Humans are
seeing
so
Stephen.
fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think writing has taught me those two things. Number one, slow down, pay attention to nature because nature is fascinating. Number two, slow down, pay attention to humans because humans are fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I think we're probably going to be wrapping up pretty soon. One other thing I guess I wanted to ask, maybe at a little bit more current of a perspective. What would you say is next for you? What are you kind of like either looking to do next? What are you busy with? And I know this is a loaded question, but maybe there's something.
I have a saying. One of my sayings is that God is my BDO, my business development officer. So he handles the pipeline of projects.
Nice.
I leave that to him. So what's coming next? There's some really big and exciting projects coming next. Um, and so, I mean, of a scale I've never done before. And I'm really happy. One of them I've signed a contract for, it's really, really exciting. I'm really happy about that. But I just need to like pull it off. I have to pull it off and make sure it happens. Then, I mean, if yeah, I don't want to say more about it. But it's to the Hollywood production company. That's what I'll say.
Nice.
To the Hollywood production company.
Wow.
And the company is owned by it's A-list actor. So it's a very interesting project. Very interesting project. So I'm just like trying to okay, Fidel, de-stress, focus. It's all about process.
Yeah.
This project will also pass.
Yeah.
It's all about process. It's all about process. Process is king. Process is the only thing that matters. And then there's some other really interesting projects with Netflix coming up that I haven't signed yet. Contract's not signed yet, but they have a solid expression of interest and saying, yeah, we'll sign a contract in a short time. But I've learned never celebrate anything until you have an executed contract in front of you.
Yeah.
And even then, don't celebrate until you've got a completed project.
Yeah.
And even then, don't celebrate until you see the rating on IMDb.
Moral of the story: when you're a writer, just don't celebrate.
Don't celebrate. Yeah, but so beyond that, I don't know. Beyond that, it's
Okay.
We'll see what God sends. Yeah.
And Fidel the novelist, nothing there.
Ish, man, speaking about process. So my current process at the moment is I'm trying to find a way in which I can do simultaneous projects. I can do projects simultaneously. It's very difficult. So I want to keep the novel going because the novel writing feeds a very important part of my curiosity, which is my curiosity about pre-colonial Africa. And I've realized that those are the novels I want to write. Just fantasy in pre-colonial Africa. That's what I want to write. And it's a very important it's a very important thing that I need to keep going, but I need to figure out the way in which to do this project simultaneously because it's a process thing. So I'm currently experimenting with that with that process, and I don't have an outcome yet. I'm still in the midst of experimentation and putting it together because the challenge is that the brain gets tired, and it's difficult to be 100% on this and 100% on that.
Yeah.
But my theory is that if I can get outlines completed, the great thing is that the outlining process feels much more mentally strenuous than the writing process. And if I can have projects in different phases, like let's say I've got the novel outlined, and so I'm writing it, and there's the process of observation, of recording what I observe is happening in the scene in front of me, versus a screenplay for a client that's in the outlining stage. So that I can handle. That I can handle.
Yeah.
But different projects in different phases, and they require different parts of the brain. So I'm trying to get to that stage, but I'm not yet there. It's still a theoretical paradigm that I have to test. But going back, I cannot only leave novels to be done in downtime between projects. That's not feasible.
Yeah.
That just won't work. Yeah.
All right. Fidel, do you have any last words or advice for our listeners, maybe for some young and upcoming writers in South Africa?
Um, I would say, be daring and be bold in terms of going out there and telling people you can do this. Like, I think a lot of young writers, sort of, they're so afraid of putting themselves out there and just saying, listen, this is who I am, and I can write this show for you. And then, of course, you get rejected a number of times, but no one will ever pick up your work and give you a chance until you bug them enough. So you have to bug people enough until, just to shut you up, they give you an opportunity. And but you can't just wait and then say, no, I'll just write this for myself. I'm just writing it for self-expression, just for myself, and keep it in the side. No, man. You see, writing is a it's not just a gift; it's a charism, and a charism is a special kind of gift that's meant to serve society and build up society. Writing is a charism, so it doesn't make sense to say I write for myself. No one writes for. I mean, come on, you don't write for yourself. That's like someone who's got the gift of cooking, and then they say, no, I just cook for myself. Like I've got a Michelin star level, but I just cook and I eat for myself. Like, come on. I mean. Or like a winemaker who just makes wine for themselves. Like, no. The same thing with writing.
Be bold.
You have to, you have to be bold. You have to go out there. You have to put your stuff out there, but put it out there in a meaningful sense. Like I know too many writers who like write creatively, and then they just like put it on their writing groups on Discord and want critiques from critique partners, but they'll never publish on Amazon. They'll never go to producers and say, yo, let me write your script for you. They'll never put their work out there in a real way.
Intentional.
So you have to be bold and put your work out there in a real way, and don't be afraid, because fear, as they say in Dune, fear is the mind killer. Fear is I've forgotten that litany of fear. If you watch Dune, or read Dune, litany of fear, memorize that. Because fear is the mind killer. It's a little death that brings total obliteration. I will not fear. I will face my fear and I will go through it, and in it, and where the fear was, there will be nothing. Or something like that. Litany of fear.
Amazing. Where can we find you? Are you on social media? If our listeners want to, keep up to date what's happening, where can they find you?
Oh, they must on Discord. Must find me on Discord, and just go on Discord and search for. Actually, go on my website, then you'll find a link to my Discord server, fidelnamisi.com, because I'm not on social media anymore.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, there you have it, guys. Thanks for everyone listening. And you can also find us, Edit Undo, on Instagram or Facebook. And we will chat to you guys soon.
Thanks very much. Cheers.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you, guys.